All right, everyone. So let's talk about this GameStop controversy. So let's get right into this, okay? Because the whole story is very, very fascinating. But at the same time, there's this. The center of the story is this thing called short selling, and it's actually simple. You can actually explain this to a 9-year-old, but the way that the internet presents things, the way that articles present things, they complicate the whole matter. So let's just get right into this. So a bunch of speculators, essentially financial vultures, said, okay, listen, GameStop's going to go down. It's a dying company. It's decaying. And like a bunch of vultures, they were going to capitalize on GameStop dying. So they said, okay, we're going to borrow a bunch of stocks belonging to GameStop with the hope that the stock will go down so that we can then buy a bunch of GameStop stocks and then sell those stocks at a high price and then make a profit. Because when these hedge funds, when these big speculators, these big, multi-billion-dollar speculators, when they buy a bunch of stocks, other people, they start playing Simon Says, and they say, oh, well, these big, hedge funds, they're doing it, so I'm going to buy those stocks also. Woo, woo, woo. So all these people, this giant horde of speculators, this giant horde of vultures, they start buying the stock, and that would bring the stock up. So these hedge fund guys, these speculators, their whole plan was, we'll borrow stocks from traders, from hedge funds, whatever. We'll borrow a bunch of stocks from whoever, and then we'll wait for the stock to go down. And then once GameStop goes down and the value of their stocks go down, well, we can then buy a bunch of stocks at a really, really cheap price. Everyone's going to start doing what we're doing. Everyone's going to start emulating us, and then those stocks go up in value, we sell them, we make a profit. Okay, this is essentially what short selling is. And I spent some time researching this stuff because I'm not very good at, economics. I'm not an economist, whatever, who cares? A lot of articles, they explain this thing in kind of a complicated way, and it shouldn't be so complicated. I mean, people should be able to explain this sort of thing to a 9-year-old. The problem is that economists love to explain things in a complicated manner in order for people to look up to them like they're geniuses. So they make things super, super complicated. People look up to them and say, oh, the economists are, they're so bright, they're so smart. I'm not as smart as those guys, but the reality is that these people can explain things in a simple way. So basically what short selling is, it goes something like this. You look at a company, right, and the company is dying, and you say, well, this company is dying. I am going to I'm going to borrow. I'm not going to buy. I'm going to borrow the stock from this company. I'm going to borrow the stock that belongs to this company. So you get the stock or the stocks from a hedge fund or from a trader or whatever. You get that stock and you borrow it, right? And you're betting that the value of that stock is going to crash. It's going to go down. And then once it's been proven that you're right and the value of that stock is very, very low, what do? Well, you haven't bought any stocks yet. You've borrowed them. But now that the value of that stock has gone down tremendously, now you're going to buy those stocks, but at a very, very cheap price because the value has declined significantly. So you buy those stocks at a super cheap price, and you're a big hedge fund guy. So what happens, since you're a big hedge fund guy like George Soros or like some guy in Wall Street, the smaller investors and other hedge funds start emulating what you do, and they start buying that stock. That increases the value of that stock, and thus it allows you to sell that stock at a higher price and make a profit. But you're not the only one who's going to be making money. The people that you borrowed that stock from, they're owed some of that money that you got. So you have to pay them some of that money. So you do make a profit, but you also have to give some money back to the people that you borrowed that stock from. Now, what happens when a bunch of nerds on the internet say, to hell with the man, we're going to buy a bunch of stocks so that these short sellers are proven wrong? What happens? The stock that you borrowed, or the stocks that you borrowed, they go up in price, thus not allowing you to buy those stocks at a cheap price. And then your plan of, buying the stock at a cheap price, bringing the value of the stock up, and then selling those stocks for a high price, and then making a profit, that whole plan just goes to shit. You can't do it because now the value of that stock is too high. You can't do it. So you're stuck with a stock that you have borrowed that's very, very high value. So now, because you can't do your little short sell thing, now you're stuck with this stock, and then you're also faced with the fact that you have to pay money to the guy that you borrowed that stock from. That guy is still owed money, so you still got to pay that guy back. So not only are you stuck with this stock that didn't go down, not only are you stuck with the fact that you were wrong, that your bet was wrong, now you're stuck with the fact that you got to pay the lender, the guy who lent you the stock, you got to pay that guy back. So you've lost money. So when these speculators said, "Oh, we're going to borrow a bunch of GameStop stocks because it's going to crash, GameStop's dying, blah blah blah," a bunch of nerds on Reddit were like, "To hell with the man! You guys made us, all you hedge fund guys, screwed over the little guy. You continue to screw over the little guy, and because of people like you, I got to work on Thanksgiving and all this stuff." So a bunch of, I guess you could call them investment activists on the internet, just bought a bunch of GameStop stocks and screwed over these short sellers. And I don't feel sorry for these short sellers. To hell with those guys. Those guys are evil. They're vultures. They're financial vultures. So in a way, this is some really good, I guess you could say, poetic justice. And here's what happened. And this is what makes the story so damn controversial. All these people on the internet, all these smaller investors, started buying stocks, GameStop stocks. That's a real tongue twister. GameStop stocks. They started buying GameStop stocks by the droves. That brought the value of the stock up, and all these people who borrowed stocks, well, they got screwed over. They got outsmarted, and they got pissed. So what happened? All these big hedge funds, all these big financial establishments like TD Ameritrade and Robinhood, and Robinhood, by the way, is an app that people use to get stocks, to buy stocks on their phones, on their smartphones. So TD Ameritrade, Robinhood, a lot of these big financial establishments, they said you can't buy GameStop stocks anymore. You can't do that. Well, why not? So we can prevent risk for our clients. We're trying to help our clients here. And the reality is that they're just trying to help these billionaires who got a bunch of GameStops, who borrowed a bunch of GameStop stocks, and they were just pissed off that they got outsmarted and they lost money. And who are some of these speculators that got mad? Steve Cohen and Gabe Plotkin, billionaires. These guys are some of the most successful hedge fund chiefs in Wall Street, and they are pissed. They're so pissed that they got these big financial establishments to not allow smaller investors to buy stock that belongs to GameStop. Can't buy those GameStop stocks no more. You can't do that. And what this proves is that the system is controlled. All this stuff about the free market. I got to get some tea. Hold on. All this nonsense about the free market, it's just nonsense. A lot of this stuff is nonsense. It is completely open to manipulation by people who are very, very wealthy, people who are wealthier than most of us, because the multi-billionaires, they prevented the little guy from investing. And we for years, for decades, we've been hearing about what? For decades, we've been hearing about how, well, in America, this is the land of opportunity. You have the freedom to invest your money. You have the freedom to, use your money to make a profit. And to a great extent, that's true. I'm not denying it. But it's limited. And when you begin to mess with the money that belongs to the multi-billionaires, they get mad. And so they wanted GameStop to crash. That's the thing. Because GameStop stocks went up over $400 a stock. Over $400. But because they prevented people from further buying those stocks, the value of those stocks went down to over 200, and then I think it went down to like 100 something, and then it went back up a little bit, but it went down. And the reason why it went down is because the little guy got prevented by multi-billionaires. In a way, a lot of the populist rhetoric is true. A lot of the populist arguments that we've been hearing since Occupy Wall Street are true. Multi-billionaires, they control the system, they manipulate the market for their own advantage, and they screw over people who are, regular folk. All of this stuff is true. It's all true. These people will destroy a company. They will destroy an economy. And they don't care, just to make money. All this stuff is true. And it makes you wonder, if the market forces are manipulated, what else is manipulated? These people have the ability to manipulate entire economies. Look at what happened back in 1992. Back in 1992, George Soros, by himself, crashed the Bank of England, crashed the British economy, crashed the pound, crashed the sterling. How did he do that? He short-sold the British pound. He did a bunch of short selling, and he crashed the pound. Basically, what happened was the pound was going down anyway, and the pound at that time was controlled by the German economy, because the British, in the year 1990, I believe, joined the currency exchange mechanism, I believe it was called. Basically, it was the European Monetary Union. It was the precursor to the euro, or to the Eurozone, the European Union. And because the British had joined this system, the pound had to be, the value of the pound had to be determined by the Deutschmark. This is before the euro. Germany was still, using the Deutschmark. The pound was worth less than the Deutschmark, and the reason for that is very simple. The German economy was the most powerful economy in Europe, and it still is. So the pound was controlled by the Deutschmark, and Great Britain was suffering from massive amounts of unemployment. So the economy was declining. The economy was going through diminishment. It was going through a lot of damage. And there was the president of the Bundesbank, the main bank of Germany. His name was Helmut Schlesinger. And Helmut Schlesinger did an interview in which he said that a European currency, he didn't specify which one, but he said a European currency is going to go down. He didn't specify which one, though. The next morning, George Soros read the interview, and somehow he knew that Mr. Schlesinger was referring to the British pound. So Soros pounced. He capitalized on the opportunity, and he just borrowed a whole bunch of pounds. He borrowed and he sold, billions. I think it was like $10 billion worth in British pounds. Completely devalued the currency and made a whole bunch of money doing it. And he crashed the pound. He crashed the British economy. And that is what forced the British to leave the European Monetary Union. So that's another example of currency manipulation. And if you want to read more on that, it's called Black Wednesday. Happened in 1992. But it makes you wonder about political manipulation. It makes you wonder how this type of manipulation can be used for political reasons. Augustin Barruel wrote a great book. It was basically a history of the French Revolution, a very big book. It's almost 1,000 pages. Well, it's actually almost 900 pages, but still close to 1,000 pages. It's called something like Memoirs Recording the History of Jacobinism, I believe the name of the book was. I don't remember the exact title, but Augustin Baruel wrote, he wrote about how the French society was manipulated into hating the government and supporting revolution. And one thing that he mentions, one thing that he elucidates on, is how food shortages were engineered. How in certain cases, ships were told to go to other parts of France and not to certain parts of France. Ships that were, that were there to transport food. They would have a certain destination, and those ships were ordered, no, don't go there, go somewhere else. So the people living in the destination wouldn't get food, and you had food shortages. And the people who wanted revolution against the king, they used this, and they said, you see, the king doesn't care. When the reality was that those food shortages were engineered. They weren't there because of some sort of natural disaster. They weren't there because the king wanted these people to starve. The food didn't come because certain people who were within the upper echelons of government and who hated the king and who wanted to remove monarchy and the church did not want that food to go there because they wanted those people to believe that the king wanted them to starve. And that was an example of manipulation. And so that manipulation was used to foment revolution. It makes you wonder. That's why I find this story, this GameStop story, so fascinating. Like a bunch of nerds on Reddit, okay, they bought a bunch of stock. They got the value of GameStop stocks to go up. They told these hedge funders basically to screw off. But then people were told you can't buy those stocks anymore because all these multi-billionaires, people like Cohen and people like Plotkin, all these big multi-billionaires, they wanted, and they still want, GameStop to fall. They want that so that they can make money. And it makes you wonder, I mean, if the financial sector is heavily manipulated, we can say the same thing about the political factor. We can say the same thing about geopolitics. Just look at terrorism. Terrorism has been used to foment racism, used to foment anti-immigrant sentiment, used to justify really unjust government policies, very destructive government policies like the Iraq War. And so really this story about GameStop, and it goes beyond GameStop, okay? The whole thing goes beyond GameStop. It's not really about GameStop. It's about the fact that people have been prevented to buy stocks because multi-billionaires want a certain company to fail so that they can make money off of it. And really what this reveals is just how manipulated the world is and how controlled the system is. It's not just the financial sector that's controlled. It's the political sector that's controlled. And also we have to remember the mob can be manipulated. The people can be manipulated to become a mob to do acts of destruction. Just look at the French Revolution. People were manipulated by what? Engineered food shortages. People were manipulated by propaganda against the king, propaganda that was unfounded, propaganda against the church that was unfounded. People were manipulated by these things so that they could become a mob, so that they could do a revolution. And who were the supporters of the revolution? It wasn't the average guy. I mean, the average peasant hated the revolution. The biggest supporters of the revolution were the wealthy. They were the bourgeoisie. They were the wealthy class. They were the economists and the lawyers and the people who were in the business class, the industrial class. Those were the biggest supporters of the revolution. It was the aristocrats. And those wealthy people manipulated the average people. They manipulated the regular folk to form a mob. They manipulated regular people to form a mob and support a revolution and to do a revolution. So we have to be very discerning. And we have to realize how these systems of manipulation work. That's why it's so crucial. And that's why I've been so much against the nationalist movements and the anti-immigration movements, because these are just forms of manipulation to get people to become mobbish and violent and to do acts of destruction. So we have to remember, we have to be aware of the reality of this manipulation and not fall for tactics that could get us to do the bidding of people who are a lot more influential than we are. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.